What's up, Facebook? It's your boy Trey Larkins, Wise Guys Sports. Everybody go and follow Wise Guys on Twitter at Wise Guys _ H. Also on Facebook, Wise Guys. Be sure to follow Wise Guys on Instagram at These Guys Know Sports. Thursday, December the 11th. I want to come on here and talk about Joe Burrow's comments yesterday in his weekly press conference. Man, I want y'all to comment. Tell me what y'all thoughts about his comments were as well. Let me know what y'all think in the chat. I'm going to give my take on Joe Burrow here shortly. I want y'all to comment. Bengal fans, this is a safe space. Come on here. Give me y'all thoughts, y'all feelings about Joe Burrow's comments yesterday. Man, Joe Burrow yesterday talked about how if he wants to continue to play the game of football, it still has to be fun to him. And my immediate reaction to Joe Burrow's comments yesterday in his press conference were, is this a Carson Palmer situation all over again for Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals? Like, is this a situation where Joe Burrow could possibly pull a Carson Palmer and demand the Bengals to trade him? And if they don't trade him, he threatened to retire. I remember back in 2011, Carson Palmer, he became so frustrated with Mike Brown and the Bengals organization, so much so Carson Palmer demanded for the Bengals to trade him. Once they decided that they weren't going to trade him, Carson Palmer threatened to retire. He threatened to retire because he was so sick of Mike Brown and the cheap-ass Cincinnati Bengals organization. Now, he ultimately got traded to the Oakland Raiders, but Carson Palmer had became so frustrated and become so upset with Mike Brown and the Cincinnati Bengals organization, so much so he demanded to be traded out of Cincinnati. And if they did not trade him, he said he would have ultimately retired. Are we seeing Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals be in a similar situation that they were in with Carson Palmer back in 2011? Is Joe Burrow going to pull a Carson Palmer on the Cincinnati Bengals? That's the question right now that has to be asked. That's the question. Because I listened to that press conference and I didn't get Andrew Luck. I know everybody wants to say that Burrow's contemplating retirement. No, I think Joe Burrow wants to continue playing the game of football, but he also knows that he's getting older and he wants to be in a position to be able to compete for Super Bowls. I think Joe Burrow, he's watching Matthew Stafford play at an elite level and have the Rams as the number one seed in the NFC. He's watching Jordan Love and the Green Bay Packers ball out and lead the NFC North. He's watching quarterbacks like Jalen Hurts, who are nowhere near as good as he is, have success because of the organization and the team around him, and watch Jalen Hurts win a Super Bowl MVP last year. He's seen Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen have multiple playoff appearances. So I don't think Joe Burrow actually wants to retire or is even considering retirement. I think Joe Burrow said what he said so he can basically put the Cincinnati Bengals organization on notice. Like, hey, if y'all don't put together a roster around me that can be a championship roster, I'm seriously going to consider demanding to be traded out of Cincinnati. That's what I think Joe Burrow did. I think Joe Burrow put the Bengals organization on notice yesterday at his press conference. I don't think Joe Burrow is contemplating retirement whatsoever. I don't think Burrow wants to retire. I think he loves the game of football. Everybody's talking about how, oh, maybe Joe Burrow will retire the same way that Andrew Luck retired. I can't see that happening. I think Joe Burrow wants to be in a winning situation. And right now, the way the Bengals roster is currently constructed, the Cincinnati Bengals do not have a championship roster. They don't even have a playoff roster at the moment. But I don't think he's contemplating retirement. I think he's just putting the Bengals organization on notice that if things don't change, there could be some changes on whether or not I want to remain being a Cincinnati Bengal and being the quarterback for the Cincinnati Bengals. That's what I think he was doing yesterday in his press conference. I don't think he's going to retire, but the question has to be asked, is Joe Burrow going to pull a Carson Palmer on the Cincinnati Bengals if things don't change? We got to have that conversation because that was a very, very interesting press conference from Joey B. Seriously. One of my coworkers even went as far as to say that they thought that Joe Burrow was going through some personal things off the field. No, this has absolutely nothing to do with what he's got going on off the field. This is all about his frustrations with Mike Brown and the Bengals organization. But the thing is, Joe Burrow, he's a great quarterback. Last year, Joe Burrow, 43 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, had over 4,900 passing yards. He completed 71% of his passes last year. I thought last year, if the Bengals found a way to slide into the playoffs, I thought last year Burrow would have deserved NFL MVP honors. That's how great Burrow played last year. I said it last year during their 5-game winning streak to end the season. If the Bengals can somehow sneak into the playoffs, Joe Burrow should win NFL MVP. Considering how bad the Bengals defense was last year, if the Bengals would have snuck into the playoffs last year, to me, he would have been a runaway NFL MVP, even over Josh Allen. So the thing is, though, in the offseason, Burrow demanded for the Bengals to re-sign T. Higgins. Burrow demanded for the Bengals to re-sign Trey Hendrickson. They were already going to re-sign Jamar Chase, but he demanded for them to re-sign T. Higgins and Trey Hendrickson. So as bad as the Bengals organization is, I have to admit, the Bengals did everything that Joe Burrow wanted them to do. The Bengals did everything that Joe Burrow wanted them to do. But the problem with the Bengals is they don't have a great scouting department as an organization. So when you pay players like Burrow, Chase, and Higgins and Hendrickson, you have to hit on your draft picks. You got to hit on those draft picks. And to me, the Bengals have not been able to hit on their draft picks. Shamar Stewart is a bust. He's a bust. He was their defensive pick and was supposed to be a legitimate player on that Bengals defense. And Stewart has been a bust. He's been a bust. And so to me, the issue with the Bengals is they don't draft well. They don't draft well. And these draft picks that they've had in the Burrow, Chase, and Higgins era have not been home runs. They haven't been home runs in the drafting department. And so I think that's the biggest issue with the Bengals. Like, I don't think they draft particularly well. Hell, they don't even have a GM. The Cincinnati Bengals don't even have a GM. They don't even have a GM. That's how cheap Mike Brown is as an owner. Like, all these other teams in the NFL, they have a GM. They got a general manager. The Bengals don't even have a general manager. And so to me, because the Bengals don't have a general manager, I think that's why they struggle to actually get these draft picks right. That's the issue with the Bengals. I said when they wanted to pay T. Higgins, I said, okay, if they pay T. Higgins, they've already paid Jamar Chase, and they've paid Joe Burrow. that means that they have to hit on these draft picks. And I don't think they hit on those draft picks. And that's why the Bengals are 4-9 and about to miss the playoffs for a third consecutive season. Yes, we all know that Joe Burrow was injured and had to deal with that injury that he suffered in week 2. That turf toe injury against the Jacksonville Jaguars. We know Burrow missed a bunch of games. And Burrow's injury prone. But I was just having this conversation with my cousin a little earlier, and we got into an argument because I'm trying to tell him, like, bro, you're delusional. Considering how the Bengals roster is built, even if Joe Burrow never got injured, I personally still don't believe the Bengals would have been locked to win the division because of the roster. My cousin was basically saying that he believes, when you look at the AFC North right now and how the AFC North has been this year, he basically said that if Burrow was healthy, the Bengals would have been locked to win the division. And I said, you can't necessarily say that because I don't think that Joe Flacco played bad. When Joe Flacco came in and played for the Bengals, Joe Flacco had 13 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. Joe Flacco did not play bad at the quarterback position in the absence of Joe Burrow. I thought Joe Flacco actually played well considering the circumstances. I thought Joe Flacco, in the absence of Joe Burrow, played well at quarterback for the Bengals. So even if Joe Burrow never had his turf toe injury, I still don't think the Bengals would have been locks to win the division. I think they would have had an opportunity to win the division. I think right now the Bengals are, 4-9? If Burrow never gets injured, I think right now they could possibly be 6-7 or 7-6. And even at 6-7 or 7-6, you're still not a lock to win the division when the Steelers are also 7-6 and the Ravens are also 6-7. I think because the Bengals have Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins, Bengal fans, they lie to themselves and actually believe that they are a team that can actually win certain football games. No, you got 3 dogs in Burrow, Chase, and Higgins. Outside of that, the Bengals don't really have much else as a football team. They don't. They don't. And when you got Burrow, Chase, and Higgins, you have a puncher's chance in any game. And I think because of that small puncher's chance, Bengal fans lie to themselves to actually believe that they are actually better than they are. Like last week against the Bills, I know the score was 39-34, but the Bills are a much better football team than the Bengals are. Bengals got bigger names than Burrow, Chase, and Higgins, but the Bills, their roster construction is better than the Bengals. And this is why, despite the Bills, to me, being a team with Josh Allen, I still feel like the Bills are probably going to be a playoff team. They're probably going to be a playoff team, and it's because of their roster construction. The Bills have no elite receivers whatsoever, but they do got a really, really good running back in James Cook. And they got a great offensive line who does a great job opening up running lanes for James Cook and Josh Allen. That's why the Bills have success. No, the Bills don't have the receivers that the Bengals have in Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, but they have the structured roster that's in place for their team to possibly be a contender. And they had Josh Allen too. They got Josh Allen, but the way the roster is built, they are able to still win football games. That's what I'm saying. The Bengals don't have that type of roster. So the margin for error is low for Joe Burrow. Jalen Hurts can go out there and have 4 turnovers, and the Philadelphia Eagles can still possibly win a football game. I just watched Monday night. Eagles, Chargers, Jalen Hurts had the worst game in his career. The worst game of his career. And the Eagles, Chargers went to overtime. They went to overtime in the Eagles, Chargers game. And Jalen Hurts had the worst game of his career. Why? Because the Eagles roster and the way it's constructed, they can win in spite of Jalen Hurts not playing his best. And because of that, they are legitimate contenders. I think the Eagles have fell off, though. Their offense is horrible. They have fell off. But despite Jalen Hurts having the worst game of his career, because the Eagles have a complete roster, they can still win games even though Jalen Hurts is having the worst game of his career. Joe Burrow doesn't have the margin for error that these other quarterbacks have, like a Jalen Hurts, like a Josh Allen, like a Jordan Love or a Matthew Stafford. He doesn't have that margin for error that these other quarterbacks have. And I think that's why he's frustrated. But he also has to take some accountability. He has to take some accountability because he wanted T. Higgins and Trey Hendrickson. By the way, I think the Bengals made the right decision to not extend Trey Hendrickson and give him this long-term deal. I think that was the right decision by the Bengals. I do. I think it was the right decision to not give Trey Hendrickson this long-term deal because Trey Hendrickson is already in his 30s. So to me, Trey Hendrickson is on the decline. He's on the decline. And I think, and we've seen it this year, Trey Hendrickson has been injured all season. So to me, the Bengals organization made the right decision in that particular situation by not signing Trey Hendrickson to a long-term deal. But when you sign your quarterback and your top two receivers to top deals and they're getting paid a lot of money, the offense is expected to be the reason why the Bengals win football games. And so if Burrow has one or two interceptions, the Bengals are not going to win those particular games. And that's exactly why the Bengals fell short in Week 14 to the Buffalo Bills. But I think the biggest issue with the Bengals is once they decided to pay T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, to me, you have to hit on your draft picks. And they have not hit on their draft picks. That's the issue. That's the biggest issue. I actually think the Bengals organization, they've done more for Joe Burrow than they did with Andy Dalton, than they did even with Carson Palmer. They've done a whole lot of things that Joe Burrow has demanded. The Bengals have given him. They've given Joe Burrow two of the top 10 receivers in pro football. And they have basically said, okay, we're going to pay you a bunch of money and we're going to pay Higgins and Chase a bunch of money as well. And you have to be the reason why we win football games. And because of that, the defense suffers. And the Bengals have one of the worst defenses in pro football because they decided to spend their money on the offensive side of the ball. So yes, Joe Burrow has a right to feel away about the Cincinnati Bengals organization. But the Cincinnati Bengals organization can also tell Joe Burrow, we gave you everything that you demanded us to give you. So it's on you to win football games and stay healthy for us to be in a position to compete for a Super Bowl. Situations where I understand both sides. I really, really do. But the biggest question right now is, will Joe Burrow pull a Carson Palmer and demand to be traded out of Cincinnati? Will he request a trade out of Cincinnati? And if the Bengals decide not to trade him, will he threaten to retire? We've seen back in 2011, Carson Palmer had a request for the Bengals to trade him. And once Mike Brown and the Bengals decided that they weren't going to trade him, Palmer threatened to retire. He threatened to retire. And so that's the biggest question right now. But I think it's enough blame to go around. I really, really do. I think the Bengals organization, they could tell Burrow, hey, we paid you a lot of money. We paid your boy Jamar Chase a lot of money. We paid T. Higgins a lot of money. You need to be the reason why we win football games. No excuses. And Joe Burrow, on the flip side, could also say the defense is pathetic. I'm 8-1 in my last 9 starts. And the offense, we're doing our part. We're putting up points, and we're still losing football games. Last year, the Bengals finished 9-8. They finished 9-8. But there were multiple games last year where Joe Burrow had great performances, and they scored over 30 points in those particular football games, and they still lost those games. And the thing is, because Joe Burrow's margin for error is low, he can't have 2 fourth-quarter interceptions like he had against the Buffalo Bills in Week 14. You just can't have it. You just can't have it. If Joe Burrow throws an interception in the first quarter, it won't have the impact that it will if he throws an interception in the fourth quarter like he did. So it's extremely complicated. Joe Burrow, the Cincinnati Bengals, it's an extremely complicated situation. But one thing I do know, that listening to that press conference, if you are a Bengals fan, you got to be worried about Joe Burrow's mental and where he's at right now as a quarterback, and whether or not he even wants to remain the quarterback for the Cincinnati Bengals after this season. Seriously. I mean, just from a mental standpoint and confidence standpoint, y'all have to finish 8-9. You got to finish 8-9. Win these last 4 straight games and be optimistic heading into the 2026 NFL season. Like, and Joe Burrow's healthy. Jamar Chase is healthy. I know T. Higgins is in concussion protocol, but at some point he's going to come back, finish the season 8-9, and remain optimistic about the 2026 NFL season. Because I think Joe Burrow, he's reached his breaking point. Whether or not he has a right to feel the way that he feels, he's reached his breaking point. And the last thing the Bengals want to do is lose an elite quarterback like Joe Burrow. But it's crazy that we are seeing this thing happen in real time, the same way that we seen it happen in 2011 with Carson Palmer. Carson Palmer requested to be traded out of Cincinnati. Mike Brown denied his trade request, and Carson Palmer threatened to retire. And it's looking more and more like Joe Burrow is taking the Carson Palmer route and thinking about his football mortality. And I think he just wants to be in a position to be able to compete for a Super Bowl. I don't think Joe Burrow wants to retire. I think that's just his way of letting the Bengals organization know, I'm putting y'all on notice that I want to compete for a Super Bowl. He's tired of watching Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Jordan Love, Matthew Stafford. He's tired of watching these other quarterbacks compete in playoff games in January. He wants to be a part of the playoffs once they roll around in January. And honestly, the type of player that he is, his game warrants that. It warrants it. Joe Burrow is big time. He's big time. I thought, again, last year, had the Bengals been able to sneak into the playoffs, I said Joe Burrow should have won NFL MVP. Seriously. I mean, 43 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, over 4,900 passing yards, completing 71% of his passes. Joe Burrow was balling last year. Jamar Chase was balling last year. Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase were not the reasons why The Bengals missed the playoffs last year in the 2024 NFL season. They missed the playoffs because they had the worst defense in pro football. But even this year, if Joe Burrow never got injured, I think the Bengals still would be struggling to make the playoffs. I think they would be 6-7, 7-6ish. And I think the NFC North, or I'm sorry, AFC North race, rather, I think the AFC North would still be exactly what it is with a healthy Joe Burrow. That's how bad the Bengals roster is and their defense. So those are my thoughts on Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals. Everybody go and follow Wise Guys on Twitter at WiseGuys_H. Also on Facebook, Wise Guys. And be sure to follow Wise Guys on Instagram at These Guys Know Sports. I'll come back on here later and talk some more football with y'all. Peace.